Hello. So I thought I'd do something a little bit different today and actually give some advice out on how to get into modular without breaking the bank. I have seen so many video tutorials on YouTube about how to get started in modular gear, and to be honest, I disagree with almost all the advice that's been given out. I think these people are just talking rubbish for the most part. So I'm going to try and give my particular take on modular synthesizers, how to get into them, and what you should be thinking about when you're designing and buying gear. Before you engage caps lock, just bear in mind that every single YouTuber will have an opinion. I am very, very biased. I play live sets on analog gear and I make some YouTube videos. I don't make tracks, I don't use DAWs, I don't use MIDI, I don't use computers, I have a hatred of any digital sound at all. That's just not for me. So if you disagree with my point of view, just bear in mind that your bias might be slightly different from mine. So maybe disengage caps lock and type a friendly comment instead of a full-on rant. So in my opinion, first place you should start is VCV Rack. It's a free download. You can download it to your computer, download a load of modules by Instro, Bafako, Audible Instruments, aka Mutable Instruments, aka all of the Behringer clones that they're going to be releasing for the next 2 years, and a ton of other modules. Download, play with it, get a feel for what modular is about before you go and spend a load of money. VCV Rack's good, but obviously having the hardware in front of you is a different experience, but you should still go and start with VCV Rack. I'm not going to talk about semi-modular gear too much. Too long didn't read. I think the Atlantics and the DFAM are by far the best semi-modular synths out there. I know that I'm known for using a load of semi-modular gear. The reason I use them is not because they're good. The reason I use them is because they are stupidly simple. So when I've got myself into a bit of a pickle in a live performance, I know that I can jump back to a DFAM or a Mother and carry on. The simplicity is what I like about them. Typically though, semi-modular gear, it's not quite as flexible as you'd like it to be. And I think if you're a beginner, I think trying to get some modules where you can fully reconfigure absolutely everything without that semi-modular bit getting in the way, I think that's a phenomenal way to go. If you're a school teacher and you're looking at getting a synthesizer into a classroom in front of a bunch of students to teach synthesis, the Behringer 2600 is just fantastic for that. The one thing I will say though, the one piece of advice I will give, as someone who absolutely hates MIDI and doesn't use it, if a semi-modular synth has a 3.5mm MIDI input, I always find them to be incredibly disappointing, because typically whoever designed it didn't think that someone might want to use CV and gate signals for that. So just a little heads up, I typically would avoid anything with a 3.5mm MIDI input, and that will save you a lot of disappointment if you do go the semi-modular route. So modular synthesis is not cheap. There's no getting around it. If you jump into this and you think, I am going to build the cheapest possible modular synth I can build, you are going to waste a hell of a lot of money. You need to think about being cost effective, not cheap. So, if you go and buy every single Behringer module, fill up a giant rack full of that stuff, you will turn around in a few years' time thinking, I shouldn't have done that. I've wasted a load of money. Be extremely selective in what you actually purchase. Try it out on VCV Rack if it's available. Do go and check out the DivKid videos, but bear in mind that DivKid is really good at selling modules. He's not very good at reviewing them. If I gave DivKid a piece of string and a yogurt pot, I could watch an hour-long presentation and walk away from it thinking that that's the next essential purchase. Don't take DivKid videos as gospel. You want to ask some questions in forums with a bunch of people who've actually used that module, because then you'll get honest feedback, such as, yeah, it's rubbish. You want to know that up front. You're not going to get that from any YouTube video, I'm afraid. The big problem, though, is that the very first initial outlay for modular synthesis is expensive. Once you get past that initial outlay, if you stick to a budget and you're disciplined, you'll actually find that it's not as scarily expensive as you might think it is. But you have to think about building the rig over time, not just going out and splurging a load of money in one go. So the trick really is about longevity. If you buy a module, it's going to typically fall into one of three categories. It might be something that you keep for the rest of your life. Fantastic. It might be a stepping stone that you'll get a few years of use out, but then you'll upgrade to something better. Less great. Or it's a module that is a complete and total waste of money. Sometimes that's because it's stupid, it's rubbish, it's too simple, or it's just the wrong thing for you. So what you need to try and do is figure out a system to make sure that you just buy the keepers. So the rules of being cost effective: buy keepers. Don't buy wastes of money, don't buy stepping stones, buy the keepers. An occasional stepping stone is fine, but if you can maintain 100% hit rate with your module purchases, that is the most cost-effective way to get into modular. You are not collecting Pokemon cards. Just because Behringer have every single Roland System 100, System 55 and all that kind of stuff under the sun doesn't mean that you need to collect them all, because most of them are a bit rubbish. So be really, really, really concise and precise with your module purchases. Don't forget to factor in the size of a module. So in modular synthesis, all our modules are measured in terms of HP, which is horizontal pitch. So for example, here's a terrible module, the Behringer 305 headphone output module. It's quite cheap, it's $99, but it is massive. It's 24 HP. Now, using just the cheapest Behringer case you can get hold of, each HP is about $1. So that particular module takes up about $30 worth of case space. If you look at something like the Make Noise XOH, which is really good and I highly recommend it, on the surface, yes, it's about twice the price. But it actually doesn't take up as much case space, which means you've got a load more space left in your case. If you literally go and buy every cheapest giant Behringer module you've got, you'll actually find that you'll spend up so much money on additional cases and really long cables. It's kind of counterproductive. Rule number 4. For any given module, the more inputs and outputs it has, that usually equates to a lot more fun. So as an example, here we have on the left the Behringer Space Effects. This has got a stereo input and a stereo output, and it can apply some reverb or delay or whatever on top. But that's all it's got. There are no inputs for your CV controls. There are no interesting things that this does. It's rubbish. It's going to be zero fun and it's a waste of money. So then you compare it to something like the Endorphins Ghost, and here you've got stereo input, stereo output, and I believe it's then 14 CV inputs and 1 CV output. Yes, that thing is 7 times the price. However, I can tell you one thing, it's way more than 7 times the fun. That thing will just keep you entertained for at least 10 years. The space effects, you'll be tired with it within a week. Rule number 5, big modular synths are stupid. Don't build a big modular synth. It's really unnecessary. So you might look at my rig and think, yes, that's what I want. I want a giant wall of synthesizer like Rob has. Don't do that. My rig is the culmination of some bad decisions, some workarounds for my bad decisions, and then some workarounds for the workarounds. And now I've ended up with something that is too big. If you see people with giant walls of synthesizer, unless your name is Hans Zimmer or Colin Benders, those people have cocked up. Do not try and idolize these people or emulate these people, and I include myself in that. I'm not going to name names. Suffice to say, if you see people with a giant wall of synthesizer and their name is not Colin Benders or Hans Zimmer, laugh at them, don't emulate them. You will need to buy a case, you will need a power supply. Let's be honest, you're going to be buying a Behringer Eurorack Go case. It does lack a few sliding nuts in it. And so long as you don't try and take, say, a Behringer Model D and put it in the case, this thing is fantastic. Just bear in mind that a lot of those like larger synth clones that Behringer make, those are like vintage 80s synths, and they were never meant to be racked in Eurorack. So if you do plug them in, bear in mind you might have some massive power supply issues. It's got nothing to do with the case and more to do with what you're putting in it. It is a fantastic case for modular gear. This is brilliant. I highly recommend it. If you're someone who is a live musician, you're playing a Moog grandmother or a matriarch on stage, there are other alternatives, cases such as the Nano Modules 104 HP case. Here you've got a balanced audio input, balanced audio output, buffered mults, precision adders, and a load of utilities that you are going to find invaluable. So if you're taking something like a grandmother and you just want a few additional modules to it, I really do strongly suggest looking at a case such as this. Beyond that, honestly, there are DIY options, but they'll end up being more expensive than the Behringer. In fact, every case option is going to end up being more expensive than the Behringer. You will need some patch cables. Color code your cables by length. Don't just get a mishmash of assorted cables. I would buy things in a 3-to-1 long, medium, short sort of ratio. The reason is that as time evolves, chances are your rig will grow in size. What today seems like a long cable, in the future will seem like quite a short one. So all of the short cables that you ended up buying initially will end up being too short to be of practical use. So I would suggest a minimum of about 30 centimeters of length. Again, this comes down to a question of the case size. People with these giant walls of synthesizer, bear in mind that any cable that's over 1 meter in length is ridiculously expensive. As in, I do have, so in that photo I've got a few black cables up the top there. They're about $12.50 each, whereas the orange cables at the front are 1 meter in length and they're $4. So the larger your case becomes, the more expensive the cables become. So don't try and get a giant case. Try and keep it restricted and sensible. If you can't fit an incredible modular synth in the space of 2 of those Behringer Eurorack Go cases, you have gone wrong. You have gone wrong. Full end of story. For really, really short cables, I actually use tendrils, which are right angles. But if you've got like a mixer into a reverb into the headphone output, normally you'll have those permanently patched. So initially I wouldn't worry about any right angle cables, but if you do need some short ones in the future, pick up some right angle cables so that you can pre-patch a little backbone, and then it just speeds things up when you're pulling your patches out, because you know what needs to be permanently connected and what doesn't. But I wouldn't worry about tendrils up front, just stick to some really basic color-coded cables. Stackable patch cables, they're rubbish. Do not waste your money on them. I know there's going to be someone engaging caps lock in the comments now. I disagree with you, save your time. The problem I have with stackable patch cables, 2 main problems. One, they're passive. As someone who plays through giant PA systems, I cannot have any passive components anywhere in my rig because it causes popping and it causes banging. I've learned from experience, having blown a front of house speaker, which was not much fun. The bigger problem though with stackable patch cables is that if you've got two cables stacked on top of each other, a slight tap, you're applying a huge amount of torque to the PCB in the jack socket that it's plugged into. I know people are like, well, I use them everywhere. It's like, oh, good. Well, speak to me in about 5 years' time, and I guarantee you they won't be using them. They're a terrible idea. Don't waste your money on them. Just avoid them like the plague. Okay, so let's talk about the edgelords of music production. Behringer. If you're trying to do things on the cheap, you can't really ignore the fact that Behringer exists. Again, thinking about what's a keeper, what's a stepping stone, and what's a complete and total waste of money. Let's start with a waste of money. The Behringer System 55 ADSR envelope, it has 1 input, 1 output. There is no fun in that at all. The ARP 2500s, alright, whatever. They're still rubbish. Don't waste your money on them. The 140 dual ADSR with the LFO, it's a bit better. It's not perfect, but it's a really nice module to actually own. I've never used the waves or the steps, to be honest, but just looking at the number of inputs or outputs in there, it's going to be somewhere between a stepping stone and a keeper, depending on whether you gel with that module or not. But then you look at something like the Abacus, and that thing is amazing. I mean, it's a Make Noise Math clone. It's a really good module. It is ethically really dubious, but it is actually a really good value module. So then you look at the price. Okay, $39 for that's Australian bucks for foreigners. The ADSR, 1 input, 1 output, $39. Not a lot of fun. Then you look at the Abacus, $99 for a lot more inputs, a lot more outputs. You can literally count the amount of fun you can have by taking the ratio between the number of inputs and outputs on that module versus that ADSR on the far right hand side. Again, like whenever you're looking at modules, try and get the best value for money, not the cheapest. VCAs, voltage controlled amplifiers, these are just really boring voltage controlled volume knobs. This is a no-brainer in the Behringer range. There's only one of those modules that is a keeper, and that is the 4-play, aka the IntelliGel Quad VCA clone. Again, really ethically dubious, but that is a really, really good module. I do own one. They're fantastic. The original IntelliGel one is highly regarded. The others, complete and total waste of money. Don't bother buying those, just buy a 4-play. If you need more VCAs, buy another 4-play. Filters, this is where things get slightly more interesting. Again, like, I'm sorry, the System 55 stuff is rubbish. Don't waste your money on it. There's no redeeming qualities to those filters at all. The Wasp, yeah, it might be a stepping stone for you, but to be honest, I absolutely hated the sound of my Dope Wasp filter. Didn't get on with it at all. It sat on a shelf. I never really used it. So, you know, I'm not going to recommend it because I think it's a bit rubbish. The ARP 2500 stuff, it's a little bit better. Bear in mind that the ARP, I mean, the 1047, I'll say, okay, that's possibly worth the money. That's about it, really. The dual Roland filter, I absolutely adore it. I think it is a fantastic filter. It's not the best sounding. In terms of sound quality, I would say this is about a 6 out of 10. But what makes this filter so good is that you've got two of them, so you can cross-modulate, you can do some crazy stuff, you can do stereo, fantastic. As a first filter, I think that's the one to go for. The Swords and the Surges, they're Mutable Instruments clones. They're really, really good. I have the original Mutable Instruments blades that the Swords is based on, and it is one of my favourite filters of all time. Little pro tip though, it is incredibly loud out of those outputs. If you plug an unpatched cable into the left drive input, it drops the entire filter down to something usable. But yeah, so filters, if you buy a wrong filter, it's not that bad. Like, honestly, the more filters you have, the better. Filters are fantastic. Then we come to the actual oscillators. The oscillators just play a single note. I think most of the VCOs in the Behringer range are terrible, and I wouldn't waste my money on any of them, to be honest. The System 100 112, I think, is probably a really, really good purchase if you're starting out. The rest I am completely uninspired or unimpressed by. Now, some people will find the Brains and the Victor to be brilliant, but again, you're asking the opinion of an analog fanboy, and so I'm not going to be wasting my money on those. But I can see that maybe some people might find those to be keepers. I personally wouldn't. That's just my opinion. But when it comes to VCOs, I think this is the one area where skimping on cost is not sensible. The IntelliGel Dixie 2, phenomenal oscillator, absolutely phenomenal. The same is true of the Instro TSL. It is a superb work of art. When it comes to modular synthesis and it comes to VCO in particular, do not skimp. Honestly, you will get so much more value for your money by buying a Dixie 2 or a TSL than you will by buying any of the Behringer range. I do think the Behringer 112 dual VCO is fantastic as a stepping stone. But that would be the only Behringer oscillator that I would recommend. Then we come to just general output modules and multi-effects units. There is nothing in the Behringer range that is worth spending the money on at all. If you can get a pre-order in for a Behringer Skies, which is a Clouds clone, okay, that's something that you might want to consider. I think that's a reasonable purchase. You're not going to feel hard done by, but any of those modules on the right hand side, they're just not worth it. Don't waste your money on them. When it comes to keepers, like, there isn't anything in the Behringer range for effects or output that are keepers. The Endorphins Ghost is just phenomenal. If you want to get a decent multi-effect unit and you don't want to be lusting after other gear, yes, that thing is not the cheapest going, but by God is it good. It's really, really good. Highly recommend it. In terms of the audio outputs, unless you're running into a USB audio interface, don't ask me about that, I'm the wrong person. Generally speaking, audio outputs fall into two categories. You've got unbalanced and balanced. So balanced you will use if you're plugging into a PA system or you need the highest quality audio output going. In terms of balanced audio outputs, the IntelliGel Outs is by far the best. Well, it's the cheapest. I mean, I use a couple of Instro modules, which are a bit more expensive, but the IntelliGel Outs will do the same job. My advice, though, for audio output is to get a Make Noise XOH. It is a phenomenal module. In terms of the rest of the Behringer range, there's the XOAC Batumi clone, aka the 4LFO. I think that thing is phenomenal. You should probably get one. The Chaos, okay, it's a Mutable Instruments Marvels clone. Personally, I never really gelled with it. But it is something that you're either going to find amazing or you're glad you have it for a few years. In terms of the rest of the range, though, there are a couple of utility modules in the System 100. If you're really into the kind of rings into clouds thing, then there is the Halos clone on the way. Again, I don't like digital, so not for me, but it might be for some people. And literally every other Behringer module, I think, is a complete and total waste of money. So, for example, all of these. So, most of these are just rubbish. Like, unquantized sequencers are not what you want. If you want to experience what Giorgio Moroder experienced in the 70s, putting together the bass line for I Feel Love, fine. That will be really, really fun once. But then you're suddenly left with something that is fundamentally rubbish and useless in a modern context. It will be a lot of fun to play with these modules, but they're just not very good. In all cases, all of these things, there are much better alternatives than these modules out there. So let's talk about sequencers. Sequencers are really important. Without it, you can't really do very much. So let's say I want to play a bass line, a melody, and a kick as the barest minimal techno that you can come up with. Like the Behringer Swing, which is the Arteria keystep clone. I'm sorry, the keystep's rubbish. It feels cheap, it's nasty, I don't like it. It plays one note at a time. Why would you want that? It's awful. Like, you can't play a bass line, you can't play a melody if you can only play one note at a time. I didn't personally get on with the Drumstep Pro. I don't like it. I know some people absolutely adore the thing. I know Lookman No Computer loves the thing. But for me, I just cannot get on with it at all. So the cheapest sequencer that I could recommend is the Korg SU64. It's not necessarily the most obvious sequencer, but actually it is a really, really good place to start. You can sequence 3 melodic tracks, you can sequence 8 different drum tracks. If you're starting out, I would highly recommend this as the first port of call. So you may have noticed when I was talking about those modules that I have very strong opinions on what's good and what isn't. And I can basically just boil this down to a simple thing. Vintage clones. I don't like them. Well, I do, and I don't. This is the problem I have with vintage clones. If I was to, if you were to come to me and say, I want to buy my first ever car, what car should I get? You know, I'm not going to be recommending that you should go out and buy a Ford Model T. I'm probably also not going to be recommending that you should go and buy a Datsun Cherry from the 70s. I'm probably going to go, just get yourself like a 10-year-old Toyota Corolla. It does the job. You know, Ford Model T, like, it will get you from A to B. But if you try and daily drive a Ford Model T, that's absolutely fine until you hit the highway in the middle of winter, in the middle of rain. And then you're going to be going, I really wish I had some windscreen wipers, I really wish I had a heater, and I really wish I had some doors, and I really wish I had an engine that could get me above 25 miles an hour. You know, a Datsun Cherry is a little bit better in that, yes, it can do highway speeds, but you're not really going to, you know, you're going to be in a fourth gear, it's going to be noisy, it's not a nice experience to daily drive, but it's a lot more functional than a Model T. And then you get to something like a Toyota Corolla. Again, not the most inspiring of cars, but you know, it does have side impact crash protection, Apple CarPlay, it does have ABS brakes, it does, you know, have a really, really efficient engine. So this is fundamentally the problem with a lot of these vintage clones. I cannot recommend anything in the System 55 module range at all from Behringer. They are a complete and total waste of money. As much as I love Bob Moog, as much as I realise that the System 55 was hugely significant in the history of synthesis, I don't want to daily drive one. Yes, they sound good, but they're really limited. The quirks and the sort of idiosyncrasies are things you just do not want to be dealing with on a daily basis. You know, I don't want to have to hand crank my car in the morning. I don't want to have to deal with the S-trig, V-trig nonsense of the Moog. As much as I love Moog, I cannot recommend the System 55. By the time you get to the System 100, they fixed quite a lot of the usability quirks and weirdness. It is starting to resemble a modern synthesizer. It does sound good, it's a lot more flexible, it's a lot more usable. But then you get to something like the Dixie 2 from IntelliGel, which is a brand new modern design. So when you get to the Dixie 2, on the surface they look kind of similar to the Roland. The differences though are subtle and a lot of the time underneath the hood. So one of the big problems with the Roland System 100 stuff is that the tuning stability is pretty awful. I can guarantee you if you buy a 112 out of the box, it's unlikely to be calibrated properly. This hasn't got anything to do with Behringer being cheap or rubbish, it's just that if you're calibrating that in a climate that's like 28 degrees, by the time it gets to Tasmania and it's 6 degrees, it's going to be out of tune. So you are going to have to go and recalibrate it yourself for your environment. Now that's not a big deal. There is a really good guide that I'll link in the description below, but it is a lot of work. More so than you really want. You get to the Dixie 2, you've got exponential linear FM, you've got you can drop down to LFO ranges, you've got a sub-oscillator output, but more importantly are two little details. Number one, that thing has an incredible tuning stability. So if it's raining, sunny, whatever the weather, it will still be in tune. The other thing that people don't realise is that IntelliGel have an incredibly good support department. So if you do have a problem, there is someone there that's going to help you out. So when it comes to oscillators, I literally do not recommend skimping out. If you are going to skimp, get the 112. Otherwise, pay the money and get something really good. You're not just paying for what's on the front panel, you're paying for a lot of reliability, ease of use, support if anything goes wrong. And the one thing that will go wrong in your rig is going to be the VCO. So having said all of that, let's go and try and build a system, or at least plan a system. We're not going to buy every single module in one go. We're going to try and spread it out over time. First thing we need to know is what the rough purpose is going to be. Now, I can't tell you what it is or why it is that you're trying to get into modular synthesis. In my particular case, I want to play some techno type genre stuff to a live audience, which means I have a few things that I'm absolutely going to need. I want to be able to play a bass line, I want to be able to play a melody, and I need a kick drum at an absolute minimum. That's the kind of fundamentals for any kind of dance music genre. I'm going to deliberately try and cheap out on every single opportunity. But where I can't cheap out, I am going to spend the money where it makes sense. And we're going to put together a plan for how we can actually build this up over time. So let's start with the classic System 100. The 5 classic modules, which are superb, by the way. So there's the 150 noise, sample and hold, the dual oscillator, dual filter, dual envelope and LFO, and dual VCA. The great thing about this system is that there are 2 of everything. So you can have a fully spec'd bassline voice and a fully spec'd melody voice. Absolutely one of the best designs of modular gear, full stop. In terms of understanding how these things work, this is a really, really good starting point, but it isn't perfect. So let's start by getting rid of that dual VCA. That dual VCA is great. You've got a 3-channel mixer into a VCA, and then you've got 2 of those. But then the problem is that you've got the IntelliJolt Quad VCA clone, and that thing is awesome. You've got 4 VCAs into a 4-channel mixer, and to be honest, that thing is just such a more useful topology than the original. Again, this comes down to a modern design. It's an absolute keeper. The vintage design is fine and functional. It will get you to where you want to go, but why are you wasting money on that when you could have something that's good and modern and useful? Next problem, the dual ADSR. I do quite like that module. The problem though is that the ADSRs are quite slow. So if you're trying to play any kind of dance music above about 110 BPM, those ADSRs are too slow for that. They're very, very good if you're playing on a keyboard, absolutely fine. But if you're playing sequenced electronic music, awful. So I'm going to recommend replacing that with the Make Noise Maths, aka the Abacus. 2 stupidly snappy envelopes. They're cyclable, so you can use them as LFOs. They're phenomenally good slew limiters. You also get a couple of attenuverters in there, a little bit of mix and some end of cycle gates, and you can modulate the rise and fall times, which you just can't do with the 140. So the loss of that LFO is a bit of a downside. Even though the Abacus is a dual envelope generator, you don't get 2 envelopes plus an LFO. You can only get 2 envelopes. So that is a bit sad to lose the LFO. Not a biggie. My advice: at some point in the future, consider getting the 4 LFO module. So you're essentially replacing that 1 LFO with 4 LFOs. It's not something you're going to require initially, but you will get a lot more out of your modules if you go and buy the quad LFO. If you can afford to replace the 112 initially with a pair of Dixie 2s, please do. Like, you will get a lot more value for your money in the long run. But the 112 isn't a bad option. But there are some downsides to it. Tuning stability, as I've mentioned. The other thing is there's only one waveform at a time coming out of that oscillator. If you look at the Dixie 2s, you've got 6 waveforms for each of them. Having the sub-oscillator there will massively fatten up the sound. But I will say this, if you're looking for a cheap oscillator that's good, the 112 is definitely the way to go. You get 2 oscillators, yes they're a bit simple, but it's actually pretty good. So let's just assume that we're not going to worry about replacing those just yet. So I now have a set of 5 core modules. 3 of the original System 100 and 2 modern versions which are significantly better. I'm going to add the full LFO into a bit of a pile for a purchase later, so I'll stick that outside. It's not something that we need to get hold of initially. We can leave that to a later date. We are going to need a headphone output module. The Make Noise XOH is, as far as I'm concerned, the best one to get hold of. I've got one in my rig. This thing is awesome. The 2-channel stereo mixer on the output is incredibly useful. So even if you move to a balanced output later on, realistically that's still going to be in your rig. I mean, that module is still in my rig today, so I'm practicing what I preach here. The final thing we're going to need is a buffered multiple. For this, to be honest, Fractals 333, just buy one of those. It is one of the most incredible modules that is available to Eurorack, full stop. It is so good. I love the thing to pieces. It's got 3 channels, where each channel can either be a 3-channel mixer, or it can be a multiple, or it can be a precision adder. So in my case, I actually own 4 of the 333s. I've got 2 in my live rig, and I've got another 2 as backup, because it's so important to what I do. The main reason that I recommend this above all other modules is that I have 2 sequencers, and those sequencers can both put out 3 melodic channels, melodic sequences. But I have a total of 16 oscillators in my rig. I cannot sequence 10 of those oscillators, so the way I do it is to cheat, and I use the 333, because if I put in 2 of those sequences into one of those channels on the 333, what I'll get is a third melodically related sequence, because I've just literally summed the notes together. That's kind of how I do the crazy sequencing, where I've got loads and loads of oscillators going, all this stuff going on. It's because I'm using a precision adder. 333 is exceptional. So it's not the only buffered multiple out there, but I think everyone who is into modular should have a 333 in their rig somewhere. There are passive multiples and there are simpler buffered multiples out there. Passive multiples, as far as I'm concerned, are a complete and total waste of money. Now, I say this because I blew a front of house speaker. The repair cost on that was significantly more than the saving of not buying a buffered multiple. The other problem with passives is that if you buy them, they literally have 0 resale value. If you know anyone who's into modular, go tap them on the shoulder, because I guarantee you they've got a little stack of passives somewhere on a shelf, and you can probably get some for free. Passives are fine for home use initially, but you are wasting your money. Just spend a little bit more and get a decent buffered multiple. If you can spend a bit more again and get a 333, you will be grateful for that. So if you're not going to get a 333 and you want to cheap out, have a look at the IntelliGel buffered malt on the right there. If you buy the IntelliGel one first, don't worry, you can get the 333 second. And if you get the 333, buy the buffered malt from IntelliGel next. You will never ever regret owning a buffered multiple. You are going to need loads of them. The same with mixers. It's just mixing and splitting signals. You need to do it all over the rig. Don't waste your money on passives. Just go for the buffers. That's my opinion. And I will not change that opinion. So I'm going to actually stick that IntelliGel one down in the bottom right there. It is something that I want to think about in the future, but it's not something that needs to be bought now. So now we have our first set of modules that we need to basically buy in order to get started with modular gear. Don't forget that you're going to need to buy a case, and you're going to need to buy a sequencer and some patch cables. Make sure you cost all of this stuff up and get an idea for how much it's going to set you back. Once you've got them, have loads and loads of fun, play around, just see what they can do, just go completely and utterly crazy, do some crazy stereo cross-modulated nonsense, just see what they can do, experiment, have loads and loads of fun, because you need to get to know the gear that you've got rather than lusting after something else. So, having practiced loads on those set of modules, I would probably want to add a kick drum. I think the Tip Top BD909 is pretty good. I would go with that. Maybe a Behringer Brains. In general though, I think if you're trying to make sort of any kind of dance music, you probably want 909 kicks. I mean, 808s, they're just a bit boomy, they're not quite the right sound for techno. If you drop a 909 kick, it sounds like dance music. An 808, maybe if you're more into hip hop, that might be your kind of thing. Honestly though, drums and Eurorack, they're kind of stupid. It will get very expensive very quickly. So even though I'm putting drums into this rig, you might want to consider having actually buying a drum machine. But I'm going to do it anyway because I'm building this rig for me, not for other people. So the final piece of the puzzle really is, okay, you've got a bass line, you've got a melody, you've got a kick drum. You're going to need some sort of mixer, preferably stereo. You're going to need some sort of effects, and then you're kind of there. So the Endorphins Ghost is just the cheapest effects module that does the job. Yes, you can buy a Skies. Yes, there are other modules that will be cheaper that are multi-effect, blah, blah, blahs. The thing is with the Ghost is that you've got a clockable delay, and the clockable is very important. You have a reverb, you have a side chaining compressor, you have a DJ filter for when you want to do that drop. Just adding that on the end of your signal chain is going to make it sound like you know what you're doing. And making something sound like you know what you're doing is really, really good because people don't look at you with a sort of slight weird side eye. I'm going to suggest you probably want to buy a buffered malt at that point, so stick in the IntelliGel. And I'm going to suggest that you might want some right angle tendril cables, because I can guarantee you the setup between the mixer, the Ghost and the XOH and your kick drum is probably not going to change. At this point you have a rig that can play techno. So when it comes to that Ghost, the reason I said that having a mult is going to be useful, if you actually send a trigger from your sequencer for the drum to the multiple, so you can get two outputs. If you send one to trigger the drum, and then send the other into the sidechain input on the Ghost, you can then send the audio output from the Ghost into the XOH and the bass drum into channel B of the XOH. If you then throw a clock from your sequencer into the clock in of the Ghost, so that your clockable delay or all of your delay repetitions are now clocked to your BPM, you basically have a techno rig. That is kind of the bare minimum that you need. It's going to sound awesome. It's going to be wicked. The next thing you need to do is practice, practice, practice. Not purchase, purchase, purchase. You need to get to know every piece of gear you've got. That previous slide is the bare minimum that will absolutely kick. You know, you could do a live set on that. Probably not a very long live set, but you've got all the fundamentals in there. Practice, 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 and then when you've done practicing, practice some more, and then think about buying something else. So then you're thinking, right, okay, well, I might want to add in some hi-hats and a snare. That will complete the techno puzzle. My advice is to always run drums through a filter. So if you get a hi-hat and a snare module, get something like the Behringer Surges, because it's got two audio inputs. It's essentially got a mixer on the front of it. But having some filter over the actual drums is a really, really good idea. It just makes it sound better, and you can dial in the sound to where you want. You probably want to add a bit more tonal variety. Just having those kind of the dual Roland filters, it will get a bit boring after a while. So think about things like, okay, the Duranalog Fold 6 is just amazing. It will take any triangle or sine wave and just turn it into something that is just mind-blowing. Something like the Make Noise DXG, yes, it's quite an expensive module compared to the Behringer filters, but what you're getting is a 3-channel stereo mixer where 2 of those channels have filter, VCA and envelope built into them. So even though it's pricey, you only need that module to start getting a couple of extra voices out of it. Really, really good options. But once you've got some tonal variety over the basics with a snare and a hi-hat, realistically, you could do a gig for about an hour-long set on just those modules alone. And it will sound wicked, you'll keep the audience entertained, and it'll be fantastic. Admittedly, I'd still prefer to have the Dixie 2s in there instead of those oscillators, just because it has a lot more presence on the dance floor. But if you can't make a bass line and a melody and a kick drum work, don't waste your money buying more oscillators and more stuff, because you're wasting your money. You need to learn the fundamentals before you spend more money. At that point, it's choose your own adventure time. Just go completely nuts. Just remember that you're trying to buy keepers. You're not trying to buy any old module that you come across. So here's a set of my recommendations across the top row. If you get any of those modules, I can guarantee you they are going to stay in the rig for the rest of time. So Quad LFO, great. The Swords, I love that filter, it's phenomenal. The Div Kid, Ran Step, the Aux and the Div Skip, really, really good modules for a bit more modulation. I use the Euclidean circles, in fact I've got 2 of them, just for generating different rhythms really quickly. I've mentioned the Dixie 2 and the TSL as oscillators. If you want a classic Moog ladder filter, word of advice, you don't want a classic Moog ladder filter. What you actually want is a Dopefer 2144, or the A1052, I think it is. That's actually a Moog ladder filter, but it's actually got CV control over resonance, and it just sounds better than the vintage Moogs, to be honest. Again, anything like, a bunch of utilities, like additional mixers, clock dividers, clock multipliers, what have you, qubit data bender, it's such an integral part of my sound. That module is exceptional. The Make Noise Tempi, not the cheapest, but by God is it a really good clock multiplier, clock divider. All the stuff on the bottom, honestly I don't have any experience with those modules. I have played with the Chaos a little bit. I can't say whether those modules are the best modules in the Behringer range, but I can say that they are going to be better than any of the vintage stuff that they're offering. So, some final pieces of advice. When it comes to oscillators, do not overload on oscillators. If you've got a sequencer that's got 3 outputs, do not buy 4 oscillators. You are wasting your money because you cannot sequence them. Now, oscillators don't have as big of an impact on the final sound as you might imagine. It's mainly about the filters more so than the oscillators. Yes, if you've got a dual complex oscillator or a wavetable oscillator, it will make an impact. But you really don't want tons of oscillators, because keeping tons of oscillators in tune and maintained is a nightmare. Take it from someone who's got 16 in my rig. You really want to just start with 2, get that down, then get a third, stop there for years, just practice, and then think about maybe getting a 4th one. Make your oscillators count. Make sure you get a sub oscillator, because that will make them so much fatter and just absolutely pump. And if you have got a boring oscillator and you want to turn it into something amazing, a wave folder like the Duranlog Fold 6 is incredible. That thing is the best sounding wave folder I've ever come across. It also happens to be the cheapest, so it's a really worthwhile purchase. In terms of filters, go nuts. Like, the more filters you have in the rig, the better. If you're thinking, oh, I might buy another oscillator, don't. Buy another filter. Filters are really, if you want the difference between, say, a Moog and a Roland 303, the big difference is the filter. It's got nothing to do with the square wave you're putting into it. Go mental on filters. Even if it's not your favourite filter in the world, chances are you'll be able to use it for drums, you'll be able to use it for filtering effects loops, whatever. You will always find a use for filters. If you've got a VCO with multiple waveform outputs, you can use multiple filters from that same one note. Just reuse that one note as much as you can, because that's how you get variance, and that's how it sounds full, fat, interesting, and changeable. Filters more so than VCOs. Modulation, yeah, we need loads of it. Whether it's LFOs, sample and hold modules, whatever it might be, the more modulation you've got, the better. If you've got the abacus as your first pair of envelopes, and then you're like, I need more envelopes, buy another abacus. Like, oh, now I need more than 4 envelopes, buy another abacus. That cost benefit analysis that we did right back at the beginning for the actual envelopes, the reality is that isn't going to change. So you shouldn't go, right, I'm going to buy a maths clone and now I'm going to go and buy the others in the Behringer range. Just buy more of the really good stuff, because the vintage stuff just isn't very good. You will need a bunch of additional mixers, just basic 3-channel inputs. You will need some attenuverters, which maths gives you. If you need more VCAs, buy another one of the 4-plays. Don't worry about doubling up modules. Again, you're not collecting Pokemon, you're building the most useful set of gear for what you're trying to do. Mix a bunch of modulation signals, go absolutely bonkers. When it comes to sequencing, the Korg SU64 is a fantastic place to start, but it's a very controlled sequencer. So that's great, because you need to actually learn the fundamentals of control before you do anything else. But in general, for any kind of live performance, I'm a firm believer that you need something that's controlled and something that's a bit wayward. So in the case of drums, I use the circadian rhythms as my drum sequencer, which is brilliant in terms of laying out the beat, laying out the kick, snare patterns, all that kind of stuff. But then I use the Euclidean circles as something to add a bit of randomized flavor over the top. Same with melodic sequences. I use the ground control to be very precise in the notes that I'm working with, but then I use precision adders and things like the Symphonian. To be honest, I only actually really use the arpeggiator on the Symphonian, so it is a complete waste of a module in my rig. But I use that, something that's wayward, something that's controlled, and then you get the best of both worlds. Also look at things that can do CV sequencing. So I use the Meleco voltage block, which unfortunately Meleco out of business now, so doesn't look like we're going to be getting any new ones of those, which is a shame because 2 of my channels have died. But you know, IntelliJ will do some really good stuff in terms of the joypad controller and the little XY thing, the tetrapad I believe it is. You know, CV sequencing for just controlling resonance, cutoff, that kind of thing. That's kind of how you get that weird 303 style sounds. The more control you have over the rig, the better. You know, bearing in mind with my rig, about 20% of it is just dedicated to sequencing. If you find yourself with 6 oscillators and 3 CV channels coming out of your sequencer, it's time to either get rid of one of your VCOs or buy another sequencer. Sequencers are more expensive than just buying 3 good oscillators. Other bits of general advice. If you know someone who's already into modular, start hanging out with them, become their best friend. It's guaranteed they've probably got a shelf full of modules they don't use anymore. Don't ask to buy those modules though, ask to borrow them. If they're sat on someone's shelf, there's a very good chance that they're not keepers. They were really good stepping stones. So my advice is to borrow them for maybe a year or 2 and then hand them back, because you probably don't want to waste money on that gear. The other thing is, if you know that a module is going to be a stepping stone, don't worry about buying it second hand, because if you buy something second hand and you go, yep, I'm only going to have it for a couple of years, when you come to sell it, you're not going to lose any money. You know, but again, I want to stress, don't be cheap, be cost effective. That's all I've got to say. Now engage caps lock and have a go at me in the comments. See you later.